It was an unusually cold, late March morning, but in no other way was it unusual. Yet. I was in the FM studio spinning discs of short, sprightly classical selections, giving the weather and time, flailing away at witticisms, and editing the 9 o'clock newscast. According to the studio clock, it was 8:15 a.m. The announcer's log, which I referred to on the air as the idiot sheet, indicated the next piece, selections of ballet music by the French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau. It was on one of those then new-fangled compact discs. Only selections of the ballet were to be played, so I cued it to the third cut. Swiveling my chair to the console, I brought up the mic and spoke. The Divertimento in C by Mozart, played by the Netherlands Radio Ensemble under Peter Dichter. And this is America's least listened to radio station, WMIS-FM, Mutual Fine Arts Public Radio in New York City. The time is 8:16. It's 28 degrees out, west winds at 12 miles per hour, gusting to 21. I introduced the Rameau and brought down the microphone. The on-air light in the studio went off. And not a moment too soon, for without warning my bowels screamed out. In the old days, before the operation, I could have screamed back and persevered, but now it was nolo contendere. I grabbed the eating section of the New York Times and dashed, pants already unbuckled, out of the studio, through the green room, and into the tiny bathroom marked Guest Lavatory. I slammed the door, whirled around to the toilet, and in the instant before my flesh made contact with the seat, I realized that I was clutching a cold metal object in my right hand. It was the inside handle of the bathroom door. I was, apparently, locked in. My bowels froze solid. Jeans and underwear bunched around my knees, I fell to the floor and crawled the few steps to the bathroom door. There my worst fears were confirmed. The solid hardwood door was shut tight. That physical fear that one gets when in extreme danger shot up my spine. My entire body began to tingle in disbelief. Then Steve Post, age 52, began to cry. I pulled myself upright, holding on to the sink, looked in the mirror, saw my face streaked with tears, and began to laugh hysterically. It was immediately clear to me that this was the real-life version of the radio nightmare I'd had hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. It's near airtime, and I cannot get to the microphone. Or once there, I can't speak. In one dream, I'm in New Zealand. It's 5 minutes before airtime. I'm naked and have only a subway token and a snorkel. In another, it's airtime, and I'm dashing into the studio, still collecting my thoughts. People stop me and ask absurd questions that I can't answer. I fight them off and plant myself, rattled, in the chair before the mic. I turn up the microphone and begin to talk, but all that comes forth are faint wisps of hot air. Not a word will issue from this mouth, which on command from an open mic has never failed me. In the dream, I panic, turn to the shelves full of records, pull one, and move to put it on the turntable. But the turntable is turned into an ice cream cone, and it is melting. But this is not a dream. It's worse. This is reality. Since my first days in radio 30 years ago, I had had one rule drummed into my skull. The air comes first. I had to get back to the studio. I knew no one would arrive in the locked inner sanctum of the radio station for at least an hour. And at 9 o'clock, I was due to read the news. I had no idea how much music was left on the CD. There was only one other person in the studio complex, Wayne, the AM announcer. And he was 100 yards away, behind roughly $2 million worth of soundproofing. Still, Wayne was my only hope. I turned to my enemy, the door, and dropped again to my knees. I put my lips to the tiny opening where the handles had once been and yelled for help in my most resonant, loud bass voice. Over and over and over I yelled through that tiny hole, knowing all the while that 90% of the volume was ricocheting off the bathroom tiles and pounding back into my head. I had not worn a watch since my first day in a radio studio. I felt that if I was lucky enough to be on the radio, as I had always so hoped, and would be surrounded by and enslaved to clocks, I would no longer wear a watch. And through all these years, I'd never missed it. Until now. I had developed an excellent sense of time, never late, my estimates rarely off more than a minute or two, but this was different. I was locked in the bathroom when I should have been on the air, and under these circumstances one's sense of time is severely altered. I supposed only minutes had passed, but, newly entombed, it felt like years. I got up off my knees, pulled up my shorts, tucked in my shirt, and zipped up my pants. Then, with all the power in my aging body, I flung myself squarely into the center of the door, ricocheted off it, and bounced against the tiles. I did this 3 more times, wrenching my arm, neck, shoulder, buttocks, knees, back. It was an old building. Good, solid, pre-war construction. I tried once more to get a grip on what was left of myself. Was the disc still playing? I figured it was, for I heard no commotion of engineers in the studio complex, as there would have been had the station fallen silent. Of course, this could have taken several minutes, ages in silent radio time, since these life-tenured mutual employees didn't pay much attention to the air or much else, except to calculate when they'd be able to retire. So I assumed the ballet played on. The studios of WMIS are located on the 39th floor of the Mutual Insurance Systems building, near the tip of Manhattan. On the floor above the studios are the offices of the radio station management. The floors below contain the offices of the vast insurance company which owns and operates this public radio station. WMIS was the city's venerable fine arts station, but to the accounting department of Mutual Insurance, it looked like a fine old tax write-off. I sat down on the toilet seat to plot my strategy. Though the situation seemed grim, I was still obsessed, as in the nightmares, with getting back to the microphone. I looked up at the window above the toilet. I knew it led to the ledge that encircled the studio complex on the 39th floor. It was a fairly wide ledge with a low embankment at its edge. I knew this not just from looking out the window, but from an incident which had made the news several months earlier. A couple of pedestrians, walking 39 floors below, had been struck on the head by tiny bits of mortar from the brick embankment. The street below had been closed for a week as work crews placed bright orange netting around the desiccated embankment to collect its molting bits. Repairs had yet to be made, and the netting remained in place. Steve Post is definitely not a brave person. So why then did this same Steve Post, on this frigid and windy morning in March, dressed in jeans, a cotton shirt, and the slippers I always changed into at the studio, not hesitate for a moment to climb out on a ledge, shedding its mortar 39 stories above the concrete streets of lower Manhattan? Because the air comes first. It was not that I suddenly became brave. I simply did not, at that moment, perceive danger. I stepped up on the rim of the toilet seat, then onto the toilet paper dispenser, and up to the windowsill. I opened the window and slid gracelessly out onto the ledge. Now, it is important to remember that I am a radio announcer. As such, it is part of my job to read the weather forecast, which includes the temperature and wind velocity, over and over and over and over each and every morning. I had already done so 3 times that morning, and the program was less than a half-hour old when my intestines precipitated my current predicament. I knew it was 28 degrees out at sea level, which I was high above. I knew it was windy, winds west 12 miles per hour, gusting to 21. I knew it had rained yesterday, and the temperature had dropped below freezing overnight. I knew all of this, and yet I didn't. For every crevice of my mind, every corner of my being was packed solid with a single notion. The microphone! The microphone displaced fear. So it should have come as no surprise when my slippered toes cracked through a thin layer of ice into a stagnant puddle of freezing water gathered at the base of the ledge. I emitted a short, pained screech, extracted my foot, turned left or south toward the tip of Manhattan Island. I eased myself along the outside wall of the studio complex against the gusty winds toward a set of windows looking in on the drab offices of tape-shuffling functionaries. They were empty, of course. Life tenured by Mutual, your firm, your friend, your family, they ambled in when the spirit moved them. I tried to open the windows, but they were locked. Security was an obsession at Mutual. I rapped on the window frantically, knuckles reddening. Recognizing futility, I continued my journey south, the ledge narrowing as it reached the tip of the island. Dressed as I was, the cold and wind were tearing through my insides. My hands were red, the tip of my ample nose looked like a Christmas tree ornament, and my toes felt like a filthy, wet string mop. Though I knew I was cold, I didn't shiver. I felt nothing but a horrible corkscrew-like anxiety ripping through my guts. I had to get to the microphone! So obsessed was I that I did not stop for a moment to consider the relatively minor consequences of not getting back to the studio. Perhaps a few minutes of dead air, then an engineer from the control room would surely notice, race, or crawl, into the FM studio, put on a recording, and search for their star announcer. And more than likely, the first place they'd look would be the bathroom in the green room. But logic was useless. The microphone was my life. I reached the windows outside the AM studio, but I knew they were permanently locked, packed inside with soundproofing and 2 layers of false wall. Beyond these obstacles sat Wayne, the AM announcer, wearing headphones. Still, I rapped as vigorously as I dared, just short of smashing through the glass. Yet, in my freezing heart, I knew this too was useless. Not even a dog could have heard my faintly feeble tapping through all that matter, the sole purpose of which is to eliminate the transmission of sound. Time. What time was it? How long had Steve Post been out on the ledge on the 39th floor of the Mutual Insurance System? 6 minutes? 10? An hour? A week? My entire life? And what about Jean-Philippe Rameau? Around the very tip of the building, and heading west rapidly now, winds 17 miles per hour, gusting to 34. I reached the window outside the newsroom where the teletype machine spewed forth the daily stories of doom, froth, propaganda, and yes, the weather. Wayne would surely come to this room to retrieve the hourly temperature readings. With any luck, he would soon stroll in and see my frozen visage through the window, blocking his normal view. Then I, Steve Post, would be home free. I crouched and waited, pleading my case to the radio gods and rapping on the window. Wayne, oh Wayne, please, please, the weather! Wayne, the weather, please! But soon this small sack of hope was deflated. The anxiety dagger pierced my bladder and kidneys. I would never get back to the studio. Never! There was now only one hope left, to get to Master Control. Master Control, or simply Master, as it is ominously referred to at radio stations, is the technical heart of every radio station. I had to get there, for I knew at least one human was on duty there 24 hours a day. Master control was outside the studio complex, beyond the locked doors that passed for studio security, and reaching it by way of the ledge represented an even longer and more harrowing journey. I peered around the corner and looked north along the west side of the building. I was slightly disoriented now, but it appeared to be about 40 feet. The ledge narrowed considerably as it wended north. Turn back? Slide right back into the bathroom and wait it out? Abandon all hope of getting to it? But that's not how the dream is supposed to end. It ends when I awaken in a cold sweat to realize it was only a dream. I profoundly wished I was asleep. I sighed and pressed on. I was shaking now, not from the cold, not from fear of hurtling 39 stories to the concrete or onto a pedestrian's head or of being impaled upon the hood ornament of some mutual executive's limo. In my crazed state, I feared only that the ballet was over. I moved along the even windier west side of the building. Eventually, I reached the northern end of the ledge and 3 large windows. I peered through, but all I could see were a couple of huge pieces of equipment. I presumed this was master control. However, never having seen it from this particular perspective before, I couldn't be sure. I lifted my raw knuckles to rap on the window, my heart swelling at the scent of the microphone. But in my eagerness, I had overlooked one final obstacle. The master control windows were covered over with thick steel mesh locked gates. Another mutual security measure. I lay supine on the ledge and wiggled my large, now somewhat swollen hands underneath the wire mesh, at the cost of some skin and one of my favorite old shirts. My arm in almost to the elbow, I rapped, or rather tapped, which was all the 2-inch space between the gate and the window would allow. Tap, 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 tap. A century passed. Tap, tap, tap. Finally, wiggling sideways between the 2 huge machines, I saw my savior. We had smiled at each other and said good morning for 10 years, but I still didn't know his name. He was short, approaching retirement, and was withered by the boredom of decades at WMIS. When he looked out the window and saw the station's star announcer laying on his back on the ledge, with my bloodied arm pathetically tapping on the window, his eyes and mind came to life for perhaps the first time in decades. He stood stone still and stared. I started to yell. "Let me in, goddammit! Let me in!" Slowly he shuffled toward the window, eyes unblinking and uncomprehending. He opened the window, unlocked the gate, looked at me and said, "What are you doing out there?" I did not pause to reply. I slid head first through the window and dashed through master control. As I did so, my eyes fixed on one of the dozens of digital clocks affixed to the equipment. It was 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes before 9. I couldn't believe it. My mind did not stop to calculate how long I'd been on the ledge on the 39th floor in a cotton shirt and slippers on a 28-degree morning. Winds west, 37 miles per hour, gusting to 83. I raced into the studio complex, through the double doors to the FM studio. Did my ears deceive me? Like the miraculous oil in the Hanukkah lamp, the endless ballet of Jean-Philippe Rameau had kept the air of WMIS FM lit through this entire, insane journey. I grabbed the pieces of news copy I'd been working on before the ordeal, sat down in my chair, rolled toward the microphone. The microphone! Took a very deep breath, cleared my throat, faded down the music, brought up the mic, and spoke. The ballet music of Jean-Philippe Rameau, performed by the Academy of St. Martin-in-the-Fields under Neville Mariner. And this is WMIS-FM, Mutual Fine Arts Public Radio in New York City. The time is 9 o'clock. And now, the news.